Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition here of Point of View, and it is great to have the roundtable guests we always have. The co-host of Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. This time last Friday was in the studios of the Good News Network, and we were doing a broadcast, but it's always good to bring around the individuals that can certainly address many of these topics. We're going to be talking about some of these issues of religious liberty. We'll also get into some of the other things that are happening in the court. A $6 trillion federal budget, and what does that might mean, as well as one of the individuals that we have certainly appreciated over the years is a man by the name of Foster Friess. We'll talk about him and remembering him as he's passed on. So there are just so many great topics to address today. In the next 2 hours, we'll do our best to cover as many as we can, and if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penn, of course, we have election season, so you're not surprised by this. I might just also mention it's Memorial Day weekend, so we're going to honor those that served in the military. But we know that whenever it comes time for a valedictorian or a salutatorian or a class president to address it, sooner or later somebody's going to say, nope, you can't say God, you can't say Jesus Christ, you can't say the Bible, right?
Yeah, you'd think they'd get the message that, you know, when a valedictorian or a salutatorian makes their speech, it's not the school speaking, it's them speaking, and they have the right to speak about their God or whatever else they want to talk about. But no, they don't get the message, and it falls to First Liberty Institute to have to go and send a letter and inform the officials, and that's what happened this time, right, Kelly?
Yeah, it was kind of a quick victory.
We'll take those.
You will take them. But it is sad that, number one, I'm grateful that Elizabeth Turner, this young lady, stood her ground. You know,
good for her.
She could have just caved, and I'm sure that's what most people do. And that was wrong to cave, you know, all across the country. I mean, we need to make sure that these kids know that they have a right to mention their faith. A valedictory address is a personal farewell. That's what it means. And the idea that, we even had, if people look at the story, they can see what the principal said to her. I mean, what she was planning to say and the religious aspects were inappropriate for this type of setting, that she can't mention her faith. So good for her for standing up, and I guess it's a message for everybody out there. There are a lot of people who hadn't had their graduations yet.
That's a good point.
They're coming
yes.
up. You know, you can be the one that informs people. Mm-hmm. Don't let your daughter, your granddaughter, your son, your grandson, whoever be intimidated. Your neighbor, they have every right. Now, what was funny is, of course, they could have talked. If she wanted to talk about Black Lives Matter or
no problem there,
critical race theory or anything else, that'd have been fine. But the one thing you can't do is talk about Jesus and talk about the most important thing in your life. And so good for Elizabeth, and this is a good victory for religious freedom.
And again, in Michigan, we have listeners in Michigan. This is Hillsdale High School. But, Penna, that's the point. We lose our liberties if we don't assert them. And sometimes we need to encourage young people, in this particular case, a young lady. But we've talked about the Kuntz cheerleaders and a variety of others that recognize that you don't back down when somebody is telling you to do something that is not constitutional.
Well, that's how these victories are won. That's how we maintain our First Amendment rights, is when people stand up for them. And sometimes it costs money or it takes an expert to help you, and that's what happened this time. And, you know, I don't know about these school officials, whether, for instance, in this case, Amy Goldsmith, who was the principal of Hillsdale High School, whether she knew for sure that she was standing on the truth, or she thought she was when she said this would be inappropriate, and that we have to, that it would maybe frustrate the valedictorian. But that she had to comply and she had to be mindful of others who may not be religious. None of that's true. I don't know if she really thought it was true when she said it, and if you educated her, Kelly, or if they're just all a little bit scared, running scared, or not wanting Jesus mentioned. But she stood her ground, and she took the opportunity, which is a great honor, to get to be valedictorian, to tell her fellow students who she was and who was going to carry her forward into her post-graduation life.
Well, if nothing else, I think this is an illustration of why we need to get involved. We've posted this article by Todd Starnes, so you can kind of see how he wrote about it. But, of course, you also can go to firstliberty.org and find some of that information. Keisha Russell's been on here as well. I love her line. Graduation is a time of celebration, not censorship. Good turn of phrase, if nothing else.
And what I love about that, too, is Keisha is sort of our lawyer on staff who does a lot of our education cases, because she was a teacher for many years before she went to law school. So she not only went to one of the top law schools in the country and is very bright, but she was a teacher first. So she has a real love for education. And so she's gotten to stand next to a lot of young women and young men, but a lot of young women, it seems like, who have been persecuted in different scenarios at colleges and high schools because of their faith. And so I love to see that. So I mean, I know everybody else is looking at Elizabeth and going, "You go, girl," and I'm there going, "Go, Elizabeth, go, Keisha."
Yes.
Yeah.
So I like both of it.
Well, I'm going to keep moving because we just have so many other things to talk about. And this is Memorial Day weekend. This is also, if you're not aware of it, the Military Appreciation Month. So even though I didn't post this one, you can find this at firstlibertylive.com or firstliberty.org. And first of all, Penna, we might just point out that every time I turn around, Kelly's got a really good guest on First Liberty Live, and that was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North yesterday.
Yes. I hate to say this because I usually try to listen to it on Thursday on the day, but I have to go back and listen to that episode of First Liberty Live. But it's been a great month and really honoring the military. And I even saw a message from Mike Berry, who handles military cases for First Liberty today. And it just really brought tears to my eyes that, to think that, we've got our military fighting in battlefields and, putting their lives on the line. And yet there's no one fighting for them sometimes when they lose their rights. And there is a concerted attack right now on the religious liberty of the members of the military. So it's an opportune moment for us to, first of all, express support, but also to keep the fight going.
Yeah, I'll admit too, I haven't gotten to see the Oliver North from yesterday because I wasn't probably in the air. I think I was in the air at the time, but I'm planning to watch it as well. But I would encourage people, if they haven't seen these videos, they can go to firstlibertylive.com.
We got the link,
and they can look at everything. And the firstliberty.org is the main website, but the one that just is going to have all the videos and interviews is firstlibertylive.com. Oliver North is normally not boring, so I think this will be a great one. But there are a lot of other great ones on there as well.
Might just mention, too, there's a Memorial Day message from Michael Berry, and, of course, we've had him on as well. When we come back from the break, one that I thought I would cover before we get into some other issues, we have talked about this before, but it's worth revisiting, the fact that the MRFF attacks a veterans memorial, calling it a wretched, unconstitutional dumpster fire. And I like it, first of all, because this was where a young 16-year-old Michael Carlson was vindicated. But also, we'll come back and talk about Stuart Shepard because he's going out on the road. Reminds me of the old days of Stoplight. Remember that? And he goes all the way to this particular memorial and does an interview on it. And so that's something else you might want to watch over the weekend. But we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
I doubt that the CEOs of major corporations travel in the same circles as I travel. If they did, they would hear the phrase, "Get woke, go broke." It appears that a majority of Americans have had enough from the woke corporate culture. But even if they don't pay attention to what many of their consumers are saying to each other and on social media, you would think that they would pay some attention to prominent political figures. Senator Rick Scott wrote an open letter to woke corporate America. He hoped that they were having fun with their virtual signaling and their attempts to one-up each other in trying to show how woke they'd become. He observed that you must have loved the accolades from your elitist left-wing peers when you took the All-Star game from Georgia. He also added, never mind that you destroyed working people's jobs and hurt people who haven't worked since COVID-19 took a member of their family or destroyed their small business. The CEOs might have even seen a Wall Street Journal op-ed by Senator Ted Cruz, if for no other reason than the criticism the senator received for writing it. He predicted that many members of Congress won't look the other way on Coca-Cola's $12 billion in back taxes owed, this time when Major League Baseball lobbies to preserve its multi-billion-dollar antitrust exemption, will say no thank you. They might even have seen the latest Rasmussen survey that discovered that more than a third of American adults said that they were less likely to purchase Coca-Cola products. In fact, a majority of Republicans and a quarter of Democrats said that they were less likely to purchase Coca-Cola products. Most of us merely want corporations to focus their attention on developing superior products and services. But stay out of the culture wars and stop trying to be more woke than your competitors. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, of course, this is Memorial Day weekend, and we wanted to do what we can to certainly thank those of you that are veterans. And, of course, we recognize that Memorial Day is for those who gave the last full measure. And as you talk about this, there was a Veterans Memorial that we've talked about on this program before, but, Penna, maybe it would be good to give people a little bit of a background. And this is a 16-year-old who did this as an Eagle Scout, and this is part of his Eagle Scout project. It is amazing how well this came together, and yet, of course, our friends, and I'm putting this in quotes, at the Military Religious Freedom Foundation referred to it as a wretched, unconstitutional dump fire, and I think it's about time to take them on, so go for it.
Well, Michael is an Eagle Scout, and his goal for his project was to honor American veterans, so he worked for 2 years. He planned, he raised private money, and he built a Veterans Memorial in his hometown of Monument, Colorado. Next time I'm in Colorado Springs, I want to go up and see it.
Yes.
But this is, his reasoning was, and this is what he said in the insignia. He said, or I guess it was just a statement that went along with this. Only two defining forces have ever offered to die for you, Jesus Christ and the American soldier. One died for your soul, the other died for your freedom. We honor those who made freedom a reality. And it was a battlefield cross with a headstone honoring 6 military branches. It's just a beautiful project. And, a young man doing this, I think, is admirable. But Mikey Weinstein of the MRFF, he's just a mean person, let's put it that way. And he's being used, I really think, by Satan to attack our military and our freedoms. And so, of course, they came out against it, and he used the terminology that you mentioned, a wretched, unconstitutional dumpster fire. And Stuart Shepard of First Liberty Live went out, and he also went with another attorney, Stephanie Taub, to look at this monument and to talk about this story. And they were really bullies, tried to sue the town of Monument for even having such a thing. And, of course, they're put in their place, and Kelly can tell us about that. But those attacks on our military keep coming. I mean, we could talk about other attacks on the military, but these attacks on the chaplains and the religious freedom of members of the military and the monuments These are things that once they're brought up, we always win. Our side always wins because there's a constitutional First Amendment freedom.
Yeah, Mikey Weinstein sometimes reminds me of the guy who wants to prosecute your children who are out selling lemonade because they didn't get a permit. This is just ridiculous. I mean, what this young man did is how many veterans would salute him?
And should, yeah.
What he did was great. And I mean, this is not something he did in his backyard in a day. I mean, over 2 years. And for not only for it to be attacked, but with the kind of wording, just very disgusting. Good news is it didn't work because he had every right to do that. And in fact, after the Bladensburg Cross decision that we won 2 years ago, these monuments and memorials all over the country are presumptively constitutional. Yes, even if they have religious aspects, crosses, Stars of David, whatever, they're protected. And so the law is now in favor of these things. And so the attempt to scare people only works if it does that. If people are scared and intimidated and essentially pull down or censor any sort of religious symbols or religious statements, there's no reason to do that. Our country is a country with plenty of secular and religious statements and monuments, and I think it's only appropriate that this happened in Monument, Colorado.
Yeah.
I think so. Let me, first of all, give some direction because some people are going to say, okay, where do I find all of this? We do have those links, but sometimes it's hard when you go through all these websites. But you can just simply go to First Liberty Live. And if you watch Oliver North and all of us around here are going to make sure we watch all 23 minutes of it. And that will be one. Then there is a short piece that we just mentioned a minute ago, which I only watched the first few seconds of it, realized that Michael Berry's son is playing the violin, so we need to watch that to its end. So that's about
God
3 or 4 minutes.
America. If you want to cry, listen to it.
And then the Stuart Shepard one is there as well, where he interviews Stephanie Taub, and that one takes about 10 minutes. So do you have enough time to give less than an hour to learn about some of that? And over the weekend, that's kind of your assignment. And if you want to really emphasize the idea of the military, we've got some great resources there, right there at First Liberty Live. Or, of course, you can simply go to firstliberty.org and find some of those materials.
Yeah, you can do that while you're eating a hot dog.
Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. Well, I'm going to keep it moving because Penna Dexter the other day sent me a piece, and this was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was God Save the Clarence Thomas Court. Now, you think about this. We usually identify a court in terms of the Chief Justice, the Warren Court, the Burger Court, whatever. And in some respects, okay, we recognize it's the John Roberts Court, but the senior member, Penna, Clarence Thomas, is having a very significant impact. And this piece by William McGurn is, I think, the second article we've posted. And I would encourage people to read it, even if you're not necessarily a legal nerd like some of us around the table, because it will help you understand what's kind of going on in the court right now.
Yes, it's called God Save the Thomas Court, and it says he's not Chief Justice, but never before has he had the power and influence he has now. And certainly we looked to Thomas, and a lot of people have been thinking in the last few years, looking at the decisions, he might be the new Anthony Kennedy because he would please conservatives sometimes and liberals other times. And but what happens is the Chief Justice has a certain amount of power, and it's also the justice that leads the majority that has some kinds of power to assign opinions. So this new court with a sort of a 6-3, I mean, you look at it and you say it's really a 6-3 conservative appointed by Republicans, 3 appointed by Democrats. It kind of deprives Justice Roberts of some of that power and hands it over to Thomas, who tends to be the leader of the conservative wing. And when I first read about this, it was back when Amy Coney Barrett was under her confirmation, and the Journal, James Toronto at the Journal wrote a piece said that we may get a conservative Chief Justice. If Roberts joins the liberals, Thomas gets to assign the opinion. I never knew that. That was something I never understood or knew, but that's the case. So it gives it gives the court even more of a a constitutional textual spin and character now. So it's a good piece of news.
Yeah, there's sort of a couple things I'll just tell people, a little inside baseball that people don't think about the Supreme Court. Number one, it only takes 4 justices to take a case. So when they take a case, you know that at least 4 have said so. Most likely, if they're smart, they don't want to take a case unless they know they got a 5th vote. But the majority, whoever the majority is, what happens is you briefing comes in, there's an oral argument, you ask questions. That week, so let's say the argument's on Wednesday. On that Friday, the justices go into a private room, nobody else is in there, just them, and they vote their initial vote on how they would rule in that case. Whatever that majority is, the most senior justice in that majority or that minority, they are the ones who assign who gets to write the opinion. So there's going to be some things to watch for right now, because Roberts has kind of been flipping around from one side to the other. I mean, he was bad on all the church and synagogue cases during COVID. It wasn't until Amy Coney Barrett showed up that all of a sudden all those shutdowns began to be stopped. So he's going to come into situations like you've got the case that's going to be coming down soon, the Fulton County case about whether you can basically tell Christian groups they can't do adoptions and foster care with the government unless they, repent of their beliefs about marriage. That case will be coming down. We're going to have, obviously, this big abortion case in Mississippi come down next year, the big gun case. So what's going to happen there, though, is let's say Roberts is not wanting things to go as conservative as it would go naturally, and that seems to be what he's doing, sort of jumping with the liberals a lot. Will he join them, making it a 6-3 decision, so he can assign who writes the decision?
So It's not as broad of a decision then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fascinating. Now, you could even have something where Roberts writes it, and then you have 5 conservatives write a concurring opinion that is actually the controlling opinion, because so it'll be really interesting to see. But Roberts has clearly now got some strategy to play.
So what does Kavanaugh play in all this? Because this article seems to, I guess we have a break coming up. They're calling Kavanaugh giving him Joe Manchin-like powers. I guess we'll talk about that after the break.
We'll talk about it right after the break.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to stay on the whole issue of religious liberty and the court for a little bit longer and then move on to some other topics. We have, of course, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford with us. We have lots of links, and the second article is God Save the Clarence Thomas Court. Mm-hmm. Again, I laugh at this because during oral arguments, he never asks a question, hardly says anything, but yet his influence is great. But you did raise a very good question before we went to the break, and that is, we are dealing with more than just Clarence Thomas. We are dealing with some other people on the courts that we have a little better idea of where they come down, but not exactly.
Yes, and the role of Justice Kavanaugh in this, Justice Kavanaugh, you wouldn't say, you wouldn't be able to rely on him as much necessarily as you would, say, Thomas or Barrett on an abortion case, or, you would, but it might not be quite as strong. And I'm thinking of this one case of Mississippi that's coming to the court right now.
Right.
This is a big abortion case, and it's 15 weeks, before 15 weeks, after 15 weeks, it would be outlawed. And how broad will this case end up being ruled? Will it be narrowly ruled, or will it come very close to overturning Roe versus Wade and Casey? So I think Roberts will have a role in whether or not that happens, and he can bring Kavanaugh, I guess, along with him.
Well, and that's the reality. Roberts really has zero power right now because if the other 5 conservatives decide to do something, he can't stop them. The only power he has is if he decides to join their side, he gets to control who writes the opinion. But still, that doesn't control really what happens. The 5 others can do that. But if he were to get like Kavanaugh to go with him, now he doesn't have 5 votes for an argument. And Kavanaugh is not, people try to, describe Brett Kavanaugh. I've known Brett Kavanaugh for a long time. Mm-hmm. He is a real conservative. And what that means is a conservative who's a real across-the-board conservative, I guess another way to say it would be somewhat of a minimalist.
Yeah, he's not gonna throw things out like precedent willy-nilly.
Well, and he's not going to, if you give him a case and you only have to go to step 2 to get the decision, he's not going to go to step 10 to make a point and to kind of preen in front of the camera. Yeah. He is going to go to step 2. And so that is being conservative. It's not the way a lot of conservatives would want him to be, because they'd say, oh, come on, go with the next step and take care of this issue for me and this issue. And he would be the traditional judicial conservative that says, no, I only have to go this far to rule in this case. And therefore, I'm not going further than that, because if I do, I'm being an activist, not a judge. And so it's kind of like almost frustrated by, that's the kind of judge you want, but you kind of wish, hey, why don't you go the next step and overrule Roe v. Wade?
But this is who we thought Roberts was. At the beginning, we thought Roberts was that kind of a judge, but he turned out to be perhaps a little bit more concerned about the court than he was the law.
Yeah,
That's the way I describe it.
Yeah, nobody knows exactly what Roberts is doing, Chief Justice Roberts is doing. He completely flipped on the same case within like a year, an abortion case, where he was in the dissent with the conservatives, and then it came back the next year, and he flipped sides completely. The most prevalent theory is that he's the chief. He's the Chief Justice. He feels like it's his. He clerked for Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Yes.
So he has this feeling of the institution of the court, mm-hmm. and that he is the chief. He is responsible for protecting the court. And of course, court packing is a very real possibility that would destroy the court. And so the theory is that Chief Justice Roberts is jumping ship with the conservatives and going with the liberals and doing weird things because he's trying not to pour gasoline around the court when somebody's trying to light a match right now, and that he's just trying to not give them extra incentive or energy or whatever, when maybe this is the short time in history when somebody would actually do something crazy enough, like packing the court, that would destroy the court. That's not a justification. I mean, obviously, as a judge, your job, or a justice, your job is to simply interpret the law and to lay that out. But that's the theory, as to try to understand why Roberts is doing what he's doing. But the truth of this article, and by the way, a lot of people see the article name and they don't know what it means. What do you mean God saved the Thomas court? Why'd they say that? Every time when the court starts, the first thing that happens is the marshal stands up and says a prayer that has been said from the beginning of our country. God save the United States in this honorable court. That's how they begin.
That's right.
So that's the play, God save the Thomas court. The truth is, no matter what, Thomas is the conservative beacon right now on the court, and he's the standard bearer, and he's the guy who's always been consistent, even when he stood alone. And now he's not alone.
Yeah.
And in addition to Thomas and his judicial philosophy, and by the way, he is such an incredible person. If you spend some time with him, we've had some groups with him, and the one line things that he said you wish you could have recorded because they're so powerful. He just really loves the country, and he has the principles. They almost it's like when somebody eats garlic and you can smell, and they don't smell good. He eats the United States of America, the founding principles, and they just come right out. They're just natural for him. But he's a hero. But one of the things people don't talk about is all these people that under Trump that got appointed to federal judgeships at the highest levels that were so solid that everybody was really excited about. Most of those people, or many of those people, had clerked for Justice Thomas.
Yeah.
So guys like Jim Ho and a lot of these other key people that you hear about, they clerk for Justice Thomas. So he's not only been an influence in what he stands for, how he's consistent and principled, but who he's mentored. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people, 4 clerks every year who are some of the brightest in the country. And he has fostered this whole family of Thomas clerks that are now becoming judges at the highest levels as well. So he's a huge influence, and it goes back to, if you'll remember, at the very beginning they tried to say he was like, they were trying to imply that he wasn't very bright. He was joining Scalia.
It's kind of funny to think back on all of those arguments against him.
And when they analyzed it, it wasn't that he was joining Scalia. It was that Scalia was joining him.
Yeah.
He was the one leading, and so that whole attack didn't work too well because it's just not true.
If nothing else, I was just thinking of a prayer target before we go to a break. Certainly pray for Clarence Thomas. We obviously have suggested you want to pray for Brett Kavanaugh. You want to pray for Neil Gorsuch. You want to pray for Amy Coney Barrett. Well, that gives you those right there. So now all we have to do is maybe pray for John Roberts. And then, because on some of these issues, Penna.
And Justice Alito, he's in
been
there.
great.
And Alito's, I forgot to mention the obvious one, because he would be there as well. So there you almost have it without, don't you? Isn't that amazing?
It's yeah. And
Samuel
Alito's
Alito.
become...
It's no wonder they're trying to pack the courts.
Yes.
When you look at the court.
Well, that's
right
the thing.
now.
Look, I don't know. Liberals is not a right description of who we're talking about. It's really the Marxist that want to change our country permanently into something it never was. They have control of almost everything now. They control the universities. They control media. They control the House, the Senate. The only thing they don't control is the courts.
The courts, and especially the Supreme Court.
And so the problem is, if you do a political move to control the courts, you don't control the courts. You've now destroyed the courts, because the whole point with the courts is they are independent. They are an independent judiciary. If they become an adjunct or underneath the political bodies, it's over. The rule of law is over. It's now just pure, raw political power that decides what freedoms, what protections you have. And you've lost something that's very special in the United States.
Would they call that maybe a Supreme Court coup?
Yes, it might be a good website.
Supreme coup.
For people who want to go see info on what this really means, the history and all that, go to Supreme Coup. And if you don't take French, Coup is COUP.
That's right.
SupremeCoop.com, and you'll see videos, history. You will be the smartest person of all your friends, and you'll educate all of them on history.
Which is not a bad idea.
Yeah, and
Not bad at all.
It's going to become
Very
more and
necessary.
more relevant in the next 5 months. That commission's meeting, and they're issuing their recommendations. The commission to reform the Supreme Court that the president appointed. So this is going to be big news over the next 5 or 6 months. You might as well be the expert on it with your friends.
Again, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and then, of course, the three that came from Trump, and that is Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. There's 5, and that might be enough just for that Mississippi case on abortion. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, can we believe this? A $6 trillion federal budget being proposed and what that's going to do to the economy. We'll talk about that right after this.
The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to review a Mississippi law that would ban nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Legal experts on both sides of the abortion issue have indicated that the case presents an opportunity for the court to modify, perhaps even to overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Jackson Women's Health Organization, Mississippi's only abortion clinic, challenged the 2018 law as unconstitutional. Both a district judge and a 3-judge panel for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said the law could not be squared with decades of Supreme Court precedent. On hearing that the Supreme Court agreed to review the Fifth Circuit's decision, Planned Parenthood Action Fund President Alexis McGill said, "By taking this case, the court will be reviewing nearly 50 years of precedent guaranteeing our right to abortion." Pro-lifers hope that the court, with 3 new Trump-appointed justices, will alter that jurisprudence. That the justices agreed to take this case means that at least 4 of them are willing to revisit the viability rule reaffirmed in Casey. The court will examine whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. In 1992, in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the Supreme Court approved a 24-week limit. Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life points out how arbitrary it was that viability as a boundary line for when the state can start protecting unborn babies was introduced into Roe v. Wade. He says it wasn't in any of the lower court cases or the briefs and was inserted right before the decision. In doing so, he says, the Supreme Court ignored the science involved and most certainly the morality. By upholding Mississippi's law, the court would not have to explicitly overturn Roe, but it would allow states more leeway to place limits on abortion. This challenge to Roe and Casey offers the court the opportunity to narrow or abandon its precedents and loosen its grip on abortion politics. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the budget, the economy, and a few other things that we need to pay attention to. The third article, I pulled this from the New York Times, because after all, if it's the New York Times, you know it must be true, but no. It turns out that President Biden today is proposing a $6 trillion budget. Now, for our younger listeners, let's help them understand that from George Washington to Ronald Reagan, the national debt was all of $1 trillion. And it was a while before even President Ronald Reagan had $1 trillion budget. Matter of fact, you really almost have to go into the Bush years to find some of that. But nevertheless, now we're talking about a $6 trillion budget, which if you then follow this article, Penna, I know you're looking at it as well, that eventually spending could be as much as $8 trillion. Again, sometimes it's hard to get a handle on that. A trillion is 1,000 billion. So we're just talking about unbelievable amounts of money. And when you talk about the federal deficit at $28 trillion, you recognize that this is going to always be spent by requiring essentially the Federal Reserve to buy treasuries with money that we print. And 30% of all the dollars that exist on this planet right now have been produced within the last year. So you also know what that's going to do to the value of the dollar. So, Penna, what's your thoughts?
It's going to have destructive repercussions on that. And part of what he wants to spend, of course, is for this families bill, which he says he's going to do fully by raising taxes on corporations. That's not going to be helpful either. So, yes, if you added everything up that was being proposed, 2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal, 1.8 trillion education and families plan, and then more, all the discretionary spending over and above what's already fixed. It was adding up to 5.7 trillion. It was already adding up there.
Anyway.
But when he makes that announcement, that $6 trillion figure, it's almost it's breathtaking. It takes your breath away to think that's where we've ended up. And it's like they don't even think about how you pay for it in one sense, or they don't take it all that seriously. And it's because their goal is for the government just to become part of every stage of life and for every person, for every family. And so they're going to take it as far as they can. I noticed that the Department of Health and Human Services, for instance, will see its budget grow by 23%. The Education Department, this is not a department we want to take more power. It will grow by 41%. So, they need more resources, says Biden, to help American families. This is all to help the family, mind you, but it's not going to. Our kids are going to be suffering for this.
I did post this one from the New York Times because I, first of all, wanted somebody, because we had people call in and say, why are we all of a sudden talking about inflation and dollar devaluation now? Well, some of that was happening under Trump, but a lot of it is happening under Biden. And you can actually look at the graphs because they have one graph for revenue, one for spending, one on the debt, and one on the deficit. So you can actually look at the New York Times, but just take where we are headed right now. They want to spend $6 trillion. Now, I think it would be terrible if we taxed people at $6 trillion, but the reality is we aren't. The federal tax revenue this year will be about $3.4 trillion. And again, this comes from the U.S. debt clock, so you can find these just as easily as I can. And so where do they get that? Well, they get $1.6 trillion in terms of income tax, $1.3 trillion in terms of payroll tax, and then a little bit more from corporate tax and all the rest. So the bottom line is, without getting into all the details, for every $6 trillion that we spend, we only bring in taxes of $3 trillion. And so this idea of pay as you go is not only not happening, you then are producing, you have to basically print money. It used to be that, well, China would buy our treasuries. They haven't bought a treasury from us in years. I mean, they are into us about $1 trillion, but that's it. Japan's into us about $1 trillion. So most of this debt is where we're just printing money in order to do that. And all three of us have grandchildren. And I'm really concerned about what happens to our children and grandchildren when this money press, essentially they're just adding ones and zeros, but basically printing the money continues on, and the dollars in your pocket today are going to be worth a lot less a year from now, and certainly a whole lot less 10 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, this is spending our children and our grandchildren into oblivion. It's irresponsible. It's selfish. It's dumb. But it's not surprising because the pandemic was so unusual what happened, and they since they forced all these businesses to close, They basically gave out massive amounts of money, and now they just feel like it's monopoly money.
Yep.
And they can do what they want. And the problem I have is, number one, it's morally wrong what we're doing to our kids and our grandkids, but I don't even think we're going to get to our kids and our grandkids. I think this thing is going to implode before we get there. We're all going to experience it. The inflation, there are, just like you can't defy gravity, you can't defy the result of this. Everybody knows you don't have free money. You can't just hand out money to everybody. You can't just say, well, we'll have a $6 trillion budget, even though we only have $3 trillion. Try that one at your house. See how long that lasts till all of a sudden the debt collectors are there and your credit's blown and your house is gone and everything else. I mean, this is what we're doing to our country right now. And, I hope enough people will speak up. I think people are beginning to realize, I'm seeing the polling and all of this, that this agenda that's being done by the administration is not a moderate agenda. This is really an extreme agenda, and unfortunately it has real consequences. And so hopefully they'll be able to stop this. But the downside to all this is, while you need 60 votes in the Senate to get by the filibuster for most bills, you don't when it comes to the budget.
Reconciliation.
And so all it takes is all the Democrats agreeing, and they can do whatever they want here, and they can spin us into oblivion, which is what this is not like a secret that's being let. This is what they're going to announce. They're really proud of this. So this is a horrible thing, and I just pray and hope that it doesn't happen.
This week, Penna, we've been talking about government overreach, and here's another example of that. We've encouraged people to recognize whether we're talking about packing the courts or whether we're talking about the Equality Act or trying to reform education or the elections or whatever. This is one more example and just one more reason why we are encouraging people to consider what they might do to support our ministry so we can get the tools and information out, because I don't think a lot of people even today realize they're proposing a $6 trillion budget.
I don't think people really, it was on the front page of most papers today,
yes.
But I think the New York Times piece is important for people to go to and see the charts. One thing is Republicans do push back and, talk about the spending. And so then the press secretary, she comes back and says, well, it's actually going to put us on a better financial footing over time, because, yes, we're going to have, deficit spending at first, the first few years, but in the out years, we'll be paying for itself. Well, that's because, they're going to continue to raise taxes, they say. That's politically difficult to do, number one. And number two, we don't want that either.
Yeah, and they will have to continue to print money. The Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, he's ready to just keep the presses going.
Right.
And if you ever took an economics class, they talk about the law of accelerating issuance and depreciation, because once you start printing the money, you have to print more money and more money and more money, and then eventually you do get to hyperinflation. That may not happen tomorrow, may not happen even 5 years from now, although I think Kelly's right. In maybe 5 years, it could happen, and we're talking
when
about...
When it happens, sometimes it happens fast.
Yes, it does. And then you look like Venezuela or Zimbabwe.
Yes.
That's the United States of America. Anyway, let's take a break. We'll take some phone calls right after this.
According to one definition, a catalyst is an agent that provokes or speeds significant change or action. According to founder James Madison, tyranny is the accumulation of all powers in the same hands. So what do those definitions have to do with each other? Here's the disturbing truth. Members of the federal government are blatantly trying to seize as much power as possible, pushing us toward tyranny. To stop tyranny, we need a catalyst. You. The most important check on government tyranny is the American people. But many Americans don't know how to stand up to the government. They need access to programs like Point of View, where listeners are not just informed, but empowered to take meaningful action. When you give to Point of View, you become a catalyst, because you're giving more people the tools they need to stand for freedom. Be the catalyst America needs to stop tyranny. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and we'll get into Penna Dexter's commentary. Also a tribute to Foster Freeze. We'll talk about the lockdowns and even a little bit about critical race theory. But since we talked about the economy for just a minute, one of the questions off air, I thought was a good one. How do we decide what we fund? And there are some kind of must-fund projects that we need to talk about. Some of those are called entitlements. Every time I say that, I usually have a caller come in and say, it's not an entitlement, I paid into this. But the reality is that's what they're called. And so right off the bat, if you're talking about a budget that is going to be more than $6 trillion, a good portion of that goes to Medicare or Medicaid. That's $1.3 trillion. A good portion of it goes to Social Security, $1.1 trillion. And then you start getting into what we would actually think, Penna Dexter, are budget categories, like the Defense Department, $726 billion, less than $1 trillion. And then you work your way down some of those other things. Another part of that is because we are so indebted, it's almost $400 billion just in interest. You have to spend that much on interest. We're getting to the point where more than half of what we spend on the Defense Department to keep this country safe and to protect the lanes of commerce around the world, more than half of it is going just to pay the interest on the debt versus paying for the Defense Department.
And that's in an era of low interest rates.
Yes, and you know what's going to happen when the interest rates go up. Now, the other part of this is if you're spending more than you take in, eventually you have to print more dollars, because would the United States default on paying Social Security? No. Would the United States default on paying food stamps? Not unless you want riots in the streets. Would the United States default on Medicare and Medicaid? No. Can the United States default on the defense? I don't think so, even though Bernie Sanders wants to keep making it smaller and smaller all the time. And you can't really default on the interest. So the only thing a Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve can do, the only thing that Janet Yellen can do in the Treasury Department, is to print more dollars to pay off those obligations, since we aren't bringing enough in to actually cover the spending that is taking place right now.
Yeah. So making the decisions, the discretionary programs, quote unquote discretionary, but you have a hard fight on your hands if you ever want to not necessarily cut a program, but just not increase it as much is considered a cut. And each one of these fights is a big political fight, a big constituency for it. So it's hard. And I'm noticing now there's a big fight over infrastructure, a bill that that Biden has, he basically ran on it, and it's a huge $2.3 trillion bill. And so he said he would open it up to negotiation with Republicans. They came back with $568 billion because they said that's what we can spend on pure infrastructure, roads, bridges, things like that. But now I think it's kind of creeping up to $1 million offer. And so, the Republicans get on board too. So the spending, what the priority is, what our caller wanted to know, or this person that didn't come on, but they wanted to know who makes the decisions. Well, they're made by a lot of people, but becomes a big political fight. And the administration has a lot of control over it, and the leaders in the House and Senate have a lot of control.
And Kelly, you said something just in passing, but it's worth mentioning again because you have to, at least we at the moment, still have a filibuster, but you don't have to get 60 votes to end a filibuster. You only need 50. And so if you can at least get 50 of the Democrats in the Senate to go along, because there's usually not a difficulty, although Nancy Pelosi's having more and more trouble keeping all the Democrats together. But let's assume that you pass just an incredibly irresponsible budget bill, because they have lately. What happens when it gets to the Senate? All you need is 50 votes. And then the tiebreaker is brought by the Vice President, Kamala Harris, right?
Yeah. So it's, there's nothing to stop it. And again, the problem on the Democratic side is the Democrats are not being led by, probably even a majority of their party, but certainly not the more moderate or even old-time liberals of the party. They're being led by the AOC and
it's true.
By the more, cultural Marxist part of the party who's got some really extreme, and many of them call themselves socialists. And so this is the problem. And so you've got this small, very extreme group of people that are essentially running the country right now because there's one party control and they control their party. And that's why you get, oh, yeah, we'll just do a $6 trillion budget, even though we only get $3 trillion of income. Again, I challenge everybody in their household to say, okay, we're gonna spend $6,000 this month, even though we have $3,000 coming in. That might seem like really awesome for a couple of months, but the end of that road is not pretty. And that's where they're wanting to take us and our country, which would be a horrible idea.
And again, for people that say you're just blaming it all on Joe Biden, no, we're not. I mean, the national debt has gone up every single year, whether we've had a Republican president or a Democratic president, whether we've had a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress. Now, to be fair, it seems to go up a lot faster under the Democrats than does Republicans. But as some people have said before, it's a difference between speeding towards a cliff at 20 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour. Either way, you're going over the cliff.
And one of the things, the questions asked by the caller that we didn't that had to drop before we got on about how do they decide this budget? One of the things is people wanting to shove in things for their particular district.
There you go.
What we call earmarks that the Republicans had stopped in the past. There had been an agreement because it was just totally out of control. So you're going to see a lot of spending in this that is completely something nobody would support if you forced everybody to vote on these things individually. But it's like, hey, I'll give you $10 billion for your district if you give me $10 billion to do something that one of my donors really wants us to do. All that doesn't make any sense financially. So that's part of the problem too. Is all that'll be lopped on top of this.
So again, just lots of issues to address, and I did want you to at least know about that budget because I think it's an important issue, and it's kind of just everybody yawns when we talk about the budget, but it's going to affect your children and your grandchildren.
It was just a year ago, or a little bit, I guess more than a year ago before COVID, that everybody was basking in the good that was done by the Trump tax cuts, and the tax cuts that Congress passed and Trump signed. And, that now they're relying on those expiring to pay for this mess. They're already, taking away something that had done so much good for so many people.
Well, and again, one of the other things that they want to do is not only raise our corporate taxes, but Janet Yellen is trying to get other countries to raise their taxes, to have a global, if you will, floor for taxes. And I noticed the other day, Wall Street Journal, did you see that? Iran said, oh, no, I don't think so.
No way.
Yeah.
They've done fine with 12.5%.
We'll let Apple and everybody come over there to Ireland. And it is not the luck of the Irish that has given us the Irish rebound, but it has been the fact that they have lower corporate taxes. So
amazing.
And again, do you really think that Janet Yellen is going to convince other countries to raise their corporate taxes so that the corporate taxes in America don't look so bad?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Anyway, when we come back, we've been talking about the lockdowns. Well, Ron DeSantis, governor, had some things to say on Sean Hannity's program. And what about this virus? Where did it come from? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
I doubt that the CEOs of major corporations travel in the same circles as I travel. If they did, they would hear the phrase, get woke, go broke. It appears that a majority of Americans have had enough from the woke corporate culture. But even if they don't pay attention to what many of their consumers are saying to each other and on social media, you would think that they would pay some attention to prominent political figures. Senator Rick Scott wrote an open letter to woke corporate America. He hoped that they were having fun with their virtual signaling and their attempts to one-up each other in trying to show how woke they'd become. He observed that you must have loved the accolades from your elitist left-wing peers when you took the All-Star game from Georgia. He also added, never mind that you destroyed working people's jobs and hurt people who haven't worked since COVID-19 took a member of their family or destroyed their small business. The CEOs might have even seen a Wall Street Journal op-ed by Senator Ted Cruz, if for no other reason than the criticism the senator received for writing it. He predicted that many members of Congress won't look the other way on Coca-Cola's $12 billion in back taxes owed, this time when Major League Baseball lobbies to preserve its multi-billion-dollar antitrust exemption will say no thank you. They might even have seen the latest Rasmussen survey that discovered that more than a third of American adults said that they were less likely to purchase Coca-Cola products. In fact, a majority of Republicans and a quarter of Democrats said that they were less likely to purchase Coca-Cola products. Most of us merely want corporations to focus their attention on developing superior products and services. But stay out of the culture wars and stop trying to be more woke than your competitors. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, lots of things to cover today, and I just thought for just a few minutes, what is the impact of the lockdowns? Well, we've talked about some of the impact economically, but what's the impact politically? There are already people starting to say that because of the lockdowns, because of the crime rate going up and others, it's looking better and better for Republicans next year when you have, of course, so-called midterm elections. The other night, Sean Hannity brought together 6 different governors, and one of those sitting next to him was Governor Ron DeSantis. And, of course, they were joking about the fact that we all want Sean Hannity to come to our state, and we'll give him all sorts of benefits and those kinds of things. But one of the things he said, Penna, was very interesting, and that is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida said that he's really convinced that not only do you have people moving to the state of Florida, they've added 1 congressional district, or 1 member of Congress, and Texas has added 2 because of that. They tend to be more conservative, but he's also made a really interesting comment that some of these individuals were Democrats, but the lockdowns turned them into Republicans. Never heard anybody say that before, and so that's our 4th article on the website.
I don't know. I was just in Florida, and it did feel very free, very few masks. They really didn't lock down very much just at first, and the amazing part of all of it was we took 4 different trips with Uber, and every driver that was either a person who had come from Cuba and was talking about how they're so worried about communism, socialism, Marxism coming to our country, and they would bring it up.
Wow.
We didn't bring anything up. Mm-hmm. We were just driving. Or they would just talk about, how happy they were in their state, and You don't have to wear your mask in my Uber vehicle and all of that. So it is true. And just the fact that you see people in these states where they didn't lock down as much, you see a lot of economic activity coming back in the places where it was hurting, like in restaurants and stores and things like that. Now, there's certainly a ways to go. But it's interesting that he made that statement. I don't know where he gets the fact about Democrats registering as Republicans. Maybe he's got some information about that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think some Democrats are very frustrated with their states, especially if they've lost their own livelihoods.
Well, again, 58,000 new Republican voters in Florida since August, so maybe some of those moving in, some of them changing their affiliation. But that was one thing I wanted to put on the table. But since I've got Kelly here, this is something else related to the COVID relief law, and we'll go up to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's in Cincinnati, so our listeners up there in Ohio may have heard this. But for the rest of the nation, there was a ruling in which the appellate court struck down the racial and gender preferences in COVID relief. In other words, if you were a minority-owned business, small restaurant owner, whatever it might be, there was a benefit and a privilege and preference given to people that had minority-owned businesses. And so at least the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that that was unconstitutional under equal protection.
Yeah, otherwise called racism. It's just like the provision in the bill that said if you were a black farmer, we're going to cancel your debts. Well, what do you mean if you're a black farmer? Well, there's a history of difficulty there. So Hispanic farmers have had no difficulty, and so the rich black farmer, the guy who owns a couple of networks, he gets his debts wiped off. But the Hispanic farmer who's been struggling for years and is barely making it, he doesn't get. Again, you can't do that. That's clearly racist. It's clearly discrimination based upon your race, which is against the law. But I want to step back from all this because we're talking about DeSantis and all this with the pandemic, saying that these people are moving that are Democrats to Florida and they're registering as Republicans. I mean, I've got to think there's some of that occurred. I mean, what happened if we go back? Originally, we were going to do a lockdown just to slow the spread so that the hospitals wouldn't be overwhelmed. Because everybody admitted at the beginning, you're not going to slow down the fact that people are going to get infected. And so, that was going to be the purpose. And if you'll look at all the states right now, it doesn't matter what they did, they have about the same rate. So it's what we said at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So these people that kept locking down, and mainly these liberal states with these liberal governors and liberal cities, all they did is destroy people's lives, their businesses, their family businesses for no reason. It was complete nonsense. Again, we saw at the beginning we could do it. We could have capacity. We could have enough intubators and everything to pass around after we got through that first little time. It should have stopped. And so, for people who are like in these states and they had their family business destroyed and they're now moving to a state that's free, I think it's very, it's very logical that those people, if they were Democrats, have said no more of that. I'll take my freedom. So I would think that would be the case, looking back now and what just happened to people.
Yes, it wouldn't be surprising. It stands to reason. And, it really is a divide between the blue and the red states. Their policies, for the most part, goes right down the line, their COVID policies with regard to who controls the state. And so, people would have gotten it anyway. They got it either at the beginning or the end, depending on what their policies were. So, yeah, it's very sad, the people's lives who were spoiled, who were ruined. And now there's still this disincentive for people going back to work with regard to the unemployment benefits. And again, in many red states, we're seeing in the past couple of weeks, governors saying we're no longer going to take those federal unemployment benefits for our people because our businesses are suffering. They need employees. And so, again, the red states will do better because of that decision being made by their governors. Otherwise, many businesses that could have come back won't.
Yeah, let me ask a question that nobody's asking right now, which is, if Trump were still president right now, what would the economy be doing? Do I think that there would be people that lost their businesses and for some of those businesses, there's no jobs? Yes. But you wouldn't have this policy that went through that says we're going to pay you more to sit at home than to work. Mm-hmm. Trump would never have allowed that. And I think the result is, as the normal, you had this booming economy under Trump, whether you like him or not. It was a booming economy. What would naturally normally occur when COVID is over and the restrictions are lifted is it would begin to take off again. It's not. And I think it would be if we had a different administration and different presidency. But when you take when you're spending money like a drunken sailor and you're, incentivizing people to not work, this is what you get. It's like, is it coming back? Yes, but gosh, how slow is it coming back? And I don't think there's any way it would be coming back that slowly if we were back under the last administration.
The left has definitely capitalized on COVID-19, and the left has a stake in people not working. I mean, a lot of people won't believe us when we say that, but it's very true. They want people to be dependent on government. They don't necessarily want people to work because it makes them free. It makes them be able to stand on their own against the government. But the more people are dependent on the government, the bigger group you can get dependent on the government, and then you begin to have to tax the wealthy people or print money to pay for all the programs to keep those people alive. The government just gains more and more power unto itself. We lose the character of our country. And, haven't we seen through critical race theory and other things an attempt to change the character of our country? Well, they're working from all directions to do that. It's a huge threat. And I think when you talk about needing point of view to be able to explain things, there are various people that are trying to explain this around the culture and the society. And, I think some people are actually beginning to listen. I hope they do before it's too late.
Well, again, as we come to a break, just mention we have been talking about this week. The theme is overreach of government, and we've used a couple of examples. Court packing, Kelly's talked about that. Yesterday, we talked about the Equality Act with Jim Dennison and the dangers there. We've talked about the reinterpretation of the Constitution. Our guest on Wednesday talked about the fact we have two constitutions, the Founders Constitution and the Progressive Constitution. Went through the whole history going all the way back to Woodrow Wilson and others trying to promote that. So again, if you are concerned about the future of this country, I hope that you will do what you can to help us get tools in your hands and the hands of others to make a difference. And of course, we encourage you to give us a call on our pledge line number, which is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Of course, we sent out emails, appeals, and all the rest. But when we come back, Penna Dexter mentioned critical race theory. About time to talk about that, and we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour as we are again focusing on a lot of different issues. Our last article that we want to talk about, although it's not the last one we will address, but the last one listed, I called Myths About Critical Race Theory. And Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, here it is, our weekend edition. And we will get to some of your phone calls in just a minute. But I brought this up because Tom Gilson has been on this program with us before. And he points out that just even opposing or pointing out the criticism of critical race theory is enough to be called racist. We're now starting to see debates where some individuals are saying, well, what good is being white in the first place? And look at all the evil of whiteness and all of this, which is not biblical, obviously. But Penna Dexter, if nothing else, I put this one up here because it helps us understand that critical race theory doesn't even allow you to criticize the theory. And if you even say, okay, maybe there are some abuses, there's never real forgiveness. There's never grace. It's all kind of a critical theory, which was based on kind of a Marxist idea that we separate not just classes, but races, and the various individuals either are victims or the victimizers, the oppressors or the oppressed. And so whites, by definition, are the oppressors, and there's nothing good that can come out of white culture. And so we need to get rid of whiteness, and we need to have wokeness in every institution, including even the Fortune 500 companies now.
It's the opposite of what Martin Luther King Jr. called for, which was not to be judged by the color of your skin, but the content of your character. And what happens is if you criticize critical race theory, then, and if you're not smart enough to be able to argue back, people will call you racist for criticizing it. And that you're ignorant, that you don't understand. And so this article by Tom Gilson I thought was very interesting because he kind of pointed out some of the gaslighting that takes place when people oppose critical race theory. For instance, they'll say if you oppose critical race theory in the classroom, it's because you don't want your kids even talking about race. Well, that's going a little bit too far. You can certainly talk about race, and you can talk about the fact that there's racism, and there has been racism in the country. Doesn't mean we're a bad country, but under critical race theory, it does mean we're a bad country. It means we're a racist country systemically. So in a sense, I think, for one thing, it's very important for us to be cognizant of what critical race theory is so we can oppose it, and that it really is Marxism at its core. And this is what I found very interesting. I was reading this morning that the Southern Baptist Convention, which will be meeting later this month, I think it's later this month or early in July, they will be meeting, and it's projected to be the biggest SBC that's taken place in 20 years. And it's because 3 years ago, the Southern Baptist Convention actually affirmed and accepted, they passed a resolution accepting critical race theory. And, back then, I don't even think we reported on that on Point of View because it didn't seem to be as big of an issue, although many of us were disturbed when we saw that. But most people didn't know what it was. Well, now they're coming out in droves to turn around and rescind that resolution because they realize that what this has done is it's taken us away from biblical truth where, we're all human beings. We're made in God's image. And we're the family of God. We're created and with a purpose. And it's not to divide against others because of our race. That's just anti-Christian. So they're coming back to rescind it. And, so I think the more that we can speak about what it is, perhaps we can turn back this juggernaut that, as you said, it first infiltrated into academia, but now it's going down to K through 12. And it's also, of course, the corporations are practicing it in just terrible ways. But people are starting to get wise to it. And, so it's just a matter of, I guess, how much people can educate themselves and make the points.
How about military?
It.
We're talking
And
about this military. You got Colonel Lohmeyer, and I want to get him on if we can to talk about his book. I mean, he was on the Space Force, and then they let him go because he was pointing at all the problems with critical race theory. So, Kelly, whether it's in the schools, whether it's in the corporations, whether it's in the military, this is a battle that really we need to take on, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like Penna mentioned. It's not really. I mean, they're using race. It's ultimately not race. This is Marxism. This is the reason why it's so incompatible with Christianity, because Marxism is a substitute for a religion, for Christianity. Look at any other country. Look at what happened in the Soviet Union. I mean, when Marxism comes in, the church has to go, and that's what this is. It organizes people not by the content of their character, but the color of their skin. And essentially what it does is it throws you into, and this is what Marxism always does, you're either an oppressor or you're the one who is being oppressed. Not individually, it's always group.
Mm-hmm.
So the oppressor is the poor white person without a job that lives in a tent in the Appalachians. That's the oppressor. The oppressed is, the Harvard law professor, African American, who is making, millions of dollars a year on the side. It's just because of what class you're in. Bible is all about individual responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's about what you do as a person. It's about you don't hold people responsible for what other people do. That's not justice. That's not right. It's not moral. But that's what this does. It tries to smear all these people that had nothing to do with the bad acts of other people, and it is just pure Marxism. And that's what it divides. That's what Marxism does. It divides and creates revolution and hatred for one another. Again, another example of why it's not biblical. And people just need to realize what it is. They need to stand up and call it out. It's racism, number one.
I might just say that Galatians 3:28 would be a great passage to have, because there's neither Jew nor Gentile, free nor slave, male nor female. We're all one in Christ Jesus. And it seems to me that there is constantly an emphasis, Penna, on the unity of the body of Christ and the fact that all are created in the image of God and have value and dignity, whether they're believers or not. And when you start dividing by race, by sexual orientation, and a variety of other issues, that leads to the division that we've seen out in the streets lately, isn't it?
Yes, and that's what it's been surprising to me to see churches adopt this, different denominations adopt it, but and I think some churches are even dividing over things like this. But when you start to see people begin to speak the truth about it, I've got a piece here by Vodi Balcom.
Yes,
he's black, and he's just written a book called Fault Lines, The Social Justice Movement and Evangelicalism's Looming Catastrophe. It could be a catastrophe for the church unless we turn around on this thing and get a biblical view of, who we are. And, if you're a white person and you're a kid in school and they're teaching you that you're guilty of racism and it's your fault that, somebody else doesn't live as well as you do or somebody else is suffering when you have had nothing to do with it. That's just a lie. It's living by lies, which, Rod Dreher has basically said, encouraged Americans not to do.
Let's take a phone call or two. Arizona, KNLB. Martha, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I have a comment about critical race theory, and thanks for taking the call. I was listening yesterday, and you had a very highly educated person from the Denison Forum talking about it. And I almost called in yesterday, but my thing is, this is a theory, okay? And my daughter, she's in college, and she already has lower education to give her facts that aren't theories, and then she can discuss the different ways, and the circular arguments are all around these different ways that other people think. But introducing it at such young ages is kind of like hammering it into your children, and then they accept that they're wrong for their whole lives.
Yeah.
And so, it needs to be fought against. But, I mean, it's a theory. It's not.
It's indoctrination, really is what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's almost as though if you're white and you're told that you're bad from kindergarten up, isn't that kind of like Munchausen by proxy? Aren't you just sort of like going to be give up on change? Don't challenge the system. I can't change the color of my skin, so nothing will ever change. And what kind of life is that
for
our children?
It's kind of child abuse. We need to take a break. I think you made a good point, and we'll try to get some more phone calls in. But I just might mention as we go to the break that Penna Dexter's commentary is one that airs, and it's on review and abortion limits. Did want to talk about that when we come back from the break. And then before we end, one of the individuals that has been involved with us over the years, Foster Freeze, it passed on the other day, and I just wanted to go around the round table and get some comments about him as well. So we have a lot more to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to review a Mississippi law that would ban nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Legal experts on both sides of the abortion issue have indicated that the case presents an opportunity for the court to modify, perhaps even to overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Jackson Women's Health Organization, Mississippi's only abortion clinic, challenged the 2018 law as unconstitutional. Both a district judge and a 3-judge panel for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said the law could not be squared with decades of Supreme Court precedent. On hearing that the Supreme Court agreed to review the Fifth Circuit's decision, Planned Parenthood Action Fund President Alexis McGill said, "By taking this case, the court will be reviewing nearly 50 years of precedent guaranteeing our right to abortion." Pro-lifers hope that the court, with 3 new Trump-appointed justices, will alter that jurisprudence. That the justices agreed to take this case means that at least 4 of them are willing to revisit the viability rule reaffirmed in Casey. The court will examine whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. In 1992, in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the Supreme Court approved a 24-week limit. Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life points out how arbitrary it was that viability as a boundary line for when the state can start protecting unborn babies was introduced into Roe v. Wade. He says it wasn't in any of the lower court cases or the briefs and was inserted right before the decision. In doing so, he says, the Supreme Court ignored the science involved and most certainly the morality. By upholding Mississippi's law, the court would not have to explicitly overturn Roe, but it would allow states more leeway to place limits on abortion. This challenge to Roe and Casey offers the court the opportunity to narrow or abandon its precedents and loosen its grip on abortion politics. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, we probably have more phone calls than we'll get to, but we'll try to do that. But Penn, I did want to at least mention that your Viewpoints commentary today is about review and abortion limits, and this is a Mississippi law that goes to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so it would ban nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. And, you know, it probably wouldn't be the overturning of Roe versus Wade, but it could actually allow a lot more limitation on abortion and really overturn a lot of precedent. And so, it's exciting to a lot of pro-lifers, and it's threatening to Planned Parenthood and others. So this will be a very interesting abortion case coming to the court, especially with the composition of the court that we have.
Well, we'll get to some of these phone calls, and then before we're done, might talk a little bit about foster frees. But let's go to South Carolina first. WHBJ and Ann, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. I have a question. There was an experiment done in a classroom in a high school in the district where I teach. And the experiment basically consisted of the white children on one side, the black children lined up on the other side. And the white children, one by one, had to walk up to a black child, a black student within their classroom and apologize for slavery. And was that critical race theory? I've read some articles, and they termed this, the teacher termed it, it was a social experiment.
Experiment? It was critical race theory. It was definitely stems from that.
And Chris Rufo, matter of fact, Chris Rufo, R-U-F-O, you know who he is. And Chris Rufo actually has put together a database of various examples of how that's been used in the schools. Sometimes even having grade school kids have to figure out their level of privilege or apologize for their whiteness or whatever that might be. That's happening, of course, on various organizations, in the military, in various corporations. But when you get at that level and put that level of guilt on young children, I've got a problem with that. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, it's immoral. It's racist. It's it's wrong on every level. I mean, the whole point of it. I mean, when you separate people, just this first step is racist. You're now looking at people, again, you're violating everything Martin Luther King said. Judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Total violation of that right there in that example. And then to go to a young child and to ask them to apologize, again, it shows you're being classed. You're being grouped by not who you are and not what you've done, but by a whole group of people, and you're being made responsible for what other people do. It's wrong. It should be, the answer is, I haven't done anything. I'm sorry that so-and-so happened to so-and-so, but I wasn't a part of that, and I wouldn't be a part of that, because I should be judged by what I do and how I treat people. And when you start, though, having everybody look through the lens of, well, you're a member of that group, and now we're into tribalism and division and hatred and revolution and all the things that Marxism loves.
Let's go back to the phones in Georgia. Priscilla, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thank you so much. I don't agree with what you all are saying, not at all. And the reason for that is because you all are talking about now, look at the solution that's happened over the years of racism and all Jim Crow and all that, and all the books that they were giving black Americans, 10, 12-year-old books, and teachers who couldn't even do math. And now we have the results of illegal aliens, undocumented aliens coming in, and we never would have had to do that. But this is the results, the solution, not the solution, but unfortunately, this is the results. Do I agree with it? No. I don't agree with anybody taking white kids and taking them over to apologize. No way. I don't agree with that. But because it wasn't taken care of in the 40s and 30s, even in the 60s and 70s, this is what we have. Maybe they should have taken black kids and offered to give them free education. That would have helped in the 80s. But they didn't. That wasn't done. So racism did exist. It does exist. But I look over and I don't judge people like that. But unfortunately, there are a lot of angry people. And I do get it. Do I like it? Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of angry people. I think this doesn't really help people that are angry because they feel they've been mistreated because of their race. And I think, free education, we do have free public education in this country for everyone. And, it's for everyone. It's not just for one race or another race. There have been steps taken over our history to try to deal with racism. I mean, certainly the Civil War was fought. We passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, was actually mainly supported by people that were more Republican. Democrats opposed it. The racism that exists in our country is not acceptable and should be dealt with. But you can't pin it on a whole race to say that you are racist. You have to just deal with it individual by individual. And, we're not a perfect country, but we're a very good country, and we have a well thought out, good Constitution. And so, we start with that and we move forward. We're moving backward right now as we go toward this divisiveness.
Well, it's just pretty simple. You don't solve racism by creating more racism, and that's what's being attempted. And it's not the right way to do. We don't look at people based on their race. Yes, we need to talk about our history, but we can also talk about how we've improved things. There are things where a lot of things they talk about now, they talk about it as racist. A lot of the things, like say education or et cetera. A lot of times those are really poverty issues. And so, for instance, a great solution would be school choice. Give people, no matter where they live, the ability to go to the best school for their children. Empower those moms and dads, and sometimes single moms, to be able to pick the best school. But politics are getting in the way of those things. So those are real solutions. And as Penna said, when you see real racism, you need to address it. But to call everybody racist, you destroy your whole ability to get at real racism. Because it's not everybody. And we have made a lot of strides, although there's still things we can do.
Let me just mention, we're just about out of time, but one of the other articles we posted here, we all know him, is Foster Freeze. He's been on the program with us before. One of the most generous people, Penna Dexter, I think I've ever met, and certainly we will miss him, and just wanted to mention that he is no longer alive, but he has left an incredible legacy through his generosity, hasn't he?
I think my memory of him is sometimes we would have him on during some of our Truth Team times, and he would, or other times when he would speak about an idea he had and, try to get people on board with that idea to make things better somewhere in the country. But he would pop up and offer, a matching grant to Point of View so that other people would then give to match that. And that was always so generous of him. And, we're just one of the beneficiaries. Charlie Kirk of Turning Point is a huge beneficiary, and just others. He's launched other groups that make America better. And that's a good legacy to leave.
Before we run out of time, let's just talk about firstliberty.org, firstlibertylive.com, and Supreme Coup. Is that right?
That's right. SupremeCout.com. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the court packing and all the information on that.
And so, again, those are just some resources. And if nothing else, I want everybody to enjoy their Memorial Day weekend.
Amen.
I want to thank Doug for sitting in today as the engineer, and Steve as well for his producing. And I hope that as it is a Memorial Day weekend, as Kelly said, eat a hot dog, but more importantly, honor those who gave the full measure for our freedom that we enjoy. We'll see you back here on Tuesday.
According to one definition, a catalyst is an agent that provokes or speeds significant change or action. According to founder James Madison, tyranny is the accumulation of all powers in the same hands. So what do those definitions have to do with each other? Here's the disturbing truth. Members of the federal government are blatantly trying to seize as much power as possible, pushing us toward tyranny. To stop tyranny, we need a catalyst. You. The most important check on government tyranny is the American people. But many Americans don't know how to stand up to the government. They need access to programs like Point of View, where listeners are not just informed, but empowered to take meaningful action. When you give to Point of View, you become a catalyst because you're giving more people the tools they need to stand for freedom. Be the catalyst America needs to stop tyranny. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.